how's it going, everybody? This is episode number 5 here on the Dry Brook and Esopus Valley. Today we are going to be focusing a little bit, at least for the first half of this video, the first 5 or so minutes of this video, on expanding our track westward. And I'm going to note to you right off the bat that my expansion here and the exact track arrangement is not permanent. This is sort of just me roughing things in, and after I had filmed this segment, I realized that I really didn't like how it was laid out, and I'm gonna explain that. I'm gonna get into that in just a second. I don't wanna get too far ahead of myself. But first thing I wanna say is make sure you tune in till the end. I do have a couple of announcements that I'm gonna wait till the end. Nothing really big or dramatic or anything, but stay tuned till the end for a couple of announcements. Okay, so getting into what's going on the screen here. I wanted to expand our track westward a little bit further, just so I kind of had an idea of where I was gonna go with this build and what the terrain was gonna look like and sort of how many baseboards I'm going for. So I decided to start bringing our track westward, and we're going into the mountain range at this point. So once we exited the farmland area that we've been working on the last couple of episodes, and the second half of this episode actually, we're gonna be entering the mountain range and getting into some really crazy territory here, hilly territory and very challenging grades. So the track right now I have set to a 2% grade going up into the mountains, and I think that should be pretty cool. I think it should be a challenge to bring some empty trains up and then loaded rock trains back down. And again, I haven't fully decided on what kind of trains are going to be coming back down, like specifically what industry is going to be at the end of the line. I'm leaning towards a cement plant or like a rock quarry or something like that. So we're going to have some heavy trains coming back down into the city, and I wanted it to be challenging, but not just so over the top that it would be impossible for our 3 engines to actually handle it. So I will have to do some off-camera testing. But this here would be a little bit before the end of the line. This is like the last runaround track that you would have access to. That would be about as far west as the passenger excursion will actually run before turning around and going back into the city limits. So now we're actually done with the track laying part, but I'm going to continue talking about it for another minute or two here. My idea with that was to, well, with the track, the thing that I really didn't like about it is that in my mind, I had this idea of going upgrade into the mountains around like a big sweeping curve around the basin of a mountainside. And so that's what I built, but I didn't realize how much track I was actually laying. So after I finished that segment and stopped recording, I measured how much track I had laid, and I effectively doubled the length of our mainline track from 4.5 miles to I think like 8.5 or 9 miles. And the whole time it's just on this bend, and I just didn't think that is going to be, or I don't think that that's going to be very visually interesting. So I'm going to go back in probably between this episode and the next one, or maybe even later on, and just bring some character into the track. We're going to have some tighter bends and some straighter sections. I obviously want to add in some bridges, waterfalls, and things like that. And then I'm gonna, once I figure out what the track arrangement is gonna be, that's when I'll start actually doing some terraforming, and I'll go in with the terraform tools and bring up the land and start kind of carving out my mountain ranges and things like that. So I'll bring you guys in for that bit of it during an episode. But until then, in between episodes, I'm gonna do the track work off camera, because I think it's gonna have a lot of it's going to involve a lot of me just kind of tinkering around, trying to get things right, and just messing around with things, and I don't know how great of a video that's going to be. So moving on. This is the next segment of this video, I guess you could say. The first part would be the track laying. The next part is actually filling in some of this farmland here, and I'm going to make a note right away that the farm textures that you're seeing now, I did change, and I changed them basically just before I finished recording. So I think one of the last clips, or the second to last clip, you'll see that the farmland changed. It's just because farmland in this game is really, the textures are just really difficult to work with. Like some of them, they have a lot of pattern to them sometimes, and you just can't have like a high pattern texture like anywhere in Trainz. It's going to stand out like a sore thumb. So I spent a little bit of time trying to figure out what textures to use, and I think I settled on something. So you'll see that by the end. But basically what I'm focusing on is trying to detail this little irrigation canal that I have here. And I might need to pull back a little tiny bit in terms of like the grasses and shrubs and reeds and stuff that I'm using, because I kind of go a little bit crazy with it in some places. But we'll see how the frame rates are impacted here and there. sometimes I get a little out of control and just go a little bit too crazy and a little bit too in depth with the grasses and shrubs in places that it's not necessary. So the idea here was just to bring in some grasses and shrubs and that sort of thing right around the irrigation ditch or irrigation canal, whatever the proper term is, just to sort of help break up the scene a little bit more. And what I'm going to do in a few moments is actually use some of these textures to further break up the assets to further break up the farmland textures, so that if you ever look at a farm on a map or like Google Earth, you'll see like that checkerboard pattern, or now in modern times you'll see kind of like a big circular pattern from the automatic sprinkler systems that they have, which might be kind of an interesting thing to try to model in Trainz, come to think of it. But anyway, classically you'd see like a sort of a checkerboard sort of look. So that's the idea, that's the look that I'm going for. Just bring in some vegetation where farmers can't necessarily, I guess, cultivate crops, or there's an irrigation ditch or something like that that prevents them from actually, going through with their tractors and plowing it in that classic sort of farmland, whatever, ground texture, rose sort of thing, you know what I'm talking about. So the thing is, when you're doing this with Trainz, you want to use that as visual elements to divide out your scene from one place to the next, rather than just having one big expansive open farmland, because this isn't Kansas or the middle America or something like that, where you just have these acres and thousands of acres of farmland that just go on as far as the eye can see. Up here in the Northeast, we have them kind of broken up into, I don't even know how many acres they would be, several acres at a time, and they're divided out with these irrigation ditches or whatever, these crop lines and stuff like that. So that's a look that I wanted to incorporate in here. It's something that I did on the P&B as well, and it's just a really great visual element to break up a really monotonous scene. And it also allows you to add to use different farm row textures, so you can use some with different grass colors or dirt colors or whatever it might be, and it adds a little bit more variety to your farm scene overall. So at this point, I'm beginning to turn my focus to the actual right-of-way and detailing along the trackage. And for some reason, I kind of struggled with this area. And I was talking to some people on my Discord about this, and I think it might be because I'm so used to these textures and assets that I used on the P&B, and how to like work with those. And here on the DBEV, I'm using a whole different palette of textures and assets. And I think it's just taking a little bit of time for me to adapt to using some of these new textures. So that might be part of it, but eventually I screwed around with it a tremendous amount off camera, like a lot. I spent a lot of time off camera trying to get the textures to match the way that I wanted and get the assets to match that I wanted. And speaking of something that I really was not happy with, here is the first of those sort of sub-irrigation ditches dividing, farmland divider thingamajigs, whatever you want to call them. This, I tried to build this the same way that I built a similar thing on the P&B, and I really was not happy with how this turned out. It just didn't feel right. It didn't blend right. It felt out of place. So I spent a lot of time off camera trying to figure out how to make it work. And one of the first things that I noticed was the splines. I laid down a lot of splines to try to get some grass textures in there in between the trees and everything like that. And I felt like maybe that would make it look really realistic. And I was like, you know what, maybe it's these splines. Let me delete the splines just to see. And once I deleted the splines, it felt a million bajillion times better. So I guess that's something worth keeping in mind. I even tried putting the splines in just like certain sections and not others, and it just didn't look right. So in the end, I ended up just deleting all of them and saying, you know what, forget it. The splines are not worth it to try to get in there. Let me just skinny it up. That was the other thing that I did, was I skinnied everything up and made it a little bit more narrow, and it just seems to flow a lot better and look a lot better. One thing I forgot to mention, I think, going into this, is that I did take a lot of time to terraform the area and continue to terraform the area as I'm going, as you can see here. And I used the plateau tool quite a bit to sort of smooth out areas. And I talk about this all the time, and I think it's one of those tips or tricks that people don't really often know or use very frequently. But if you use the plateau tool on like a medium sensitivity and you spread out the radius pretty large, you can use that to sort of like even out areas and get like a really smooth transition, like a really nice hillside. Like let's say you've got some areas that are too high and some areas that are too low and they're next to each other, you can use the plateau tool to bring them together if you have your sensitivity turned just right. You know, the terrain up or the terrain down tool tends to sometimes be a little bit too finicky, a little too sensitive in places. So I do recommend checking out the plateau tool. Takes a little bit of practice to really get used to it and learn to use it that way, but once you get the hang of it, I think it's a really great way to terraform your just easy, you know, nice slopey hillsides and stuff like that. So definitely give that a look. And lastly, I decided to do a little bit of detailing around here. You can kind of see in the background, I did some background work too, filled it in with some trees. It's sort of just roughed in. A lot of this is roughed in, sort of like how I did with the P&B, where areas were sort of complete, and then I would go back and do like all the really heavy detailing work. So I like to think right now what I'm doing is laying the groundwork, and I feel like I'm, you know, repeating myself a bajillion times saying this sort of thing in different episodes, but I'm laying the groundwork to be able to come back later on and with fresh eyes and add more details. So I'm doing a little bit of detail work here, adding some signs and some road markings, but I'm sure I'm gonna come back and do some more stuff. And obviously there's plenty of things that still need to get done background element wise, as well as foreground element wise. Like I said at the very beginning of this series, I want it to be very detailed, but not overly detailed to the point where I'm gonna be losing frames, sacrificing frames to have like a really beautiful route. So it's always a balancing act with this game, you know? On one hand, you've got your frame rate, and then the other hand, you've got detailing. But anyway, that's gonna bring us into our cinematics here. And while the cinematics roll, I've got two sort of light announcements here. The first one is, if you're watching this on October 12th, 2018, today is my 2-year anniversary on YouTube. And that is awesome. I didn't think I'd be doing it for as long as I've been doing it. If you've been with me for the past 2 years, I thank you very much. And if you are new here, I really highly encourage you to subscribe. On my 1-year anniversary, I hit 2,000 subscribers on the same day as my anniversary. So if by the end of this episode, if you're not subscribed, please hit the subscribe button, because it would be really awesome to hit 4,000 by the end of the day, Friday, and be able to celebrate 2 milestones once again. So thank you so much for watching, guys. The second announcement is getting into the end of October and the beginning of November. Things are going to be getting very busy on my end in terms of work and things like that going on outside life sort of things. So with that in mind, videos might become a little bit more sparse. I am going to continue to work on this route and record, so there might be a whole bunch of episodes like all at once come mid-November and into December, which is really awesome. But I am going to continue to do stuff off camera and continue to do stuff on camera and record. I just might not be able to have time to do my voiceovers and actually compile a video together as frequently as I have been doing. So just bear that in mind as we get into the colder months, but there's lots more stuff in store. I've got a lot of good things planned for the next few months and through the winter time. So with that in mind and that said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.